Rain on glass, neon humming low. A small-town diner holding its breath, a waitress named Mara polishing a counter she already cleaned twice. 3 men push their luck, then the bell above the door rings, and the people she once saved walk back. Into her life, this is Drunks Harassed the Waitress. Then her old unit walked in, a story about courage that knows how to be quiet and strong. Before we begin, help me know you. Tell me in the comments where in the world you are watching from. Write your city and country, and if there is a place that makes you feel safe on a hard night, share it by name, a diner, a porch, a mosque, a church, a friend's kitchen. Let our community see itself. Stay with me to the final minute. There is a small moment with a coin on a counter that changes everything. If your shoulders ease while you listen, type steady in the comments so others can find this after. You now take 1 slow breath in and 1 slow breath out. Come inside, the bell is about to chime. Friday night settled over Riverbend like a heavy quilt, the kind that holds warmth and worry at the same time. The diner windows glowed against the drizzle outside, neon humming, floor smelling of coffee and worn pine. A radio murmured an old country song. Chairs stacked on half the tables as closing hour crept close. Mara Delgado moved between booths with a practiced grace, a tray in one hand, a tired smile that made strangers feel safe, a small silver bracelet on her wrist engraved, with names she never forgot, names that still showed up in her dreams. She had learned how to move in noise and silence, how to read a room, how to keep a heartbeat steady when others shook. Years ago, she had another uniform, a medic patch and a rucksack, a voice that told people to breathe and keep their eyes on her. Now it was an apron and a pen behind her ear, but the mission felt the same. Keep people okay, get them through the night, make it to morning with one more story to tell. The bell over the door jingled, and the last 3 men of the evening drifted in, the smell of beer and gasoline trailing behind them. Travis with the red baseball cap and a knuckle tattoo that looked like it had been inked in a garage. Red Dawson with a scar under his eye and a laugh that tried to scare the room. Wally Finch with shaky hands and eyes that slid sideways. They were already loose and loud, already leaning on the edges of what was decent, and the drizzle outside turned the sidewalk into a mirror that caught their reflections and made them look larger. Then Gus Patel, owner and keeper of keys, stood behind the counter cleaning a glass that did not need cleaning. His shoulders tightened, his eyes flicked to Mara in a question. "You want me to tell them we are closing?" Mara shook her head with a kindly nod. "Let me handle it." She had easy ways first, polite ways. The ways that let men keep their pride while they put away the rough edges. She set down waters without asking. She called them gentlemen. She asked what they needed to feel better on a rainy night. Coffee for the road, soup to steady the hands, pie to sweeten the mouth. They started with jokes that bent the line, with the kind of teasing that smells like smoke before you see flame. Red asked her if she was single and why someone pretty was working this late. Wally leaned too hard against the pie display. Travis drummed fingers on the table like a counting song. Jonah Reed, the teenage busboy with the soft hoodie and a heart, built for rescue, froze near the dish tub. Mara put herself between him and the men without making it obvious. The way you shift a chair a few inches and suddenly a path is narrow where it used to be wide. The first real wrong turn came with a careless hand. A corner of a menu flicked against her arm as she reached to refill a glass, a small act that said, "We can touch your space whenever we want." Then another, a whistle that stuck to the air, a curse that did not belong in a room with a jar of lollipops. For kids by the register, Mara felt the old training rise like tide. Posture straight, voice low and calm, chin level, palms open. She used names when she spoke to them. "Travis, this is a family place, Red. I need you to keep your voice kind. Wally, the coffee is hot and I would hate to see you spill it." Words like sandbags laid one by one against a rising river. Gus watched with a jaw that clenched and unclenched. thinking of the sign on the wall that said kindness served here, thinking of the hockey stick by the mop sink he had never lifted against a soul, Ruthie Halverson at the corner stool, a music teacher who wore cardigans and courage, folded her, hands around a teacup, and whispered a prayer that had no denomination. Outside, a pair of sirens passed, distant and fading. The diner breathed with them, then settled again. Jonah took a step toward the kitchen, eyes wet and angry. Mara gave him the small look that says, "Hold fast, we get through this together, one breath at a time." The men did not like the way Mara did not flinch. Some people need the world to wobble when they push it, and when it does not, they push harder. Red reached for the lollipop jar and took 2, then 3, then pocketed a handful, calling it a tip for the lady. Wally slapped a coaster against the table and left a scratch. Travis stood up and blocked the aisle. The clock clicked toward closing, and the room felt smaller. Rain thickened into a steady drum on the awning. The radio song ended, and a hush fell that made every sound too sharp. Mara chose a different angle. She smiled in a way that was real but set boundaries. She told a story about the town when it flooded last spring, how strangers lifted sandbags together and nobody asked who was from where. She asked Travis if he ever built anything with his hands besides trouble. She asked Red if the scar under his eye was from helping someone or hurting them, not accusing, just wondering. An open door with a choice behind it. She was not trying to win. She was trying to give them a way back to themselves. It works more often than people expect. It did not work tonight. Travis leaned in so close she could count the frayed threads on his cap brim. He told her she had a bossy voice. He told her some night she would learn to watch her tone. Red laughed with his head back. Wally said something about rules and who makes them. Jonah flinched. Gus took a step from behind the counter, and Red held up a finger. A warning. Not yet. Mara felt a familiar cold clarity, the kind that shows you exits and objects and angles, the kind that arranges the room into a map, the kind that used to come with the sound of rotors in the distance. On the wall by the register hung a framed photo. Sunlight on a tarmac, a squad of dusty smiles around a medic with a braid and a crooked grin, Boozer the radio man with a grin like mischief, Hartley with arms like tree trunks and a soft spot for strays, Lena with eyes that saw farther than the horizon, Miles with a stethoscope and the patience of stone, and in the middle Mara, younger and thinner, a hand on the shoulder of someone who did not make it home. The frame had a small coin tucked into the corner, a challenge coin with an emblem that meant family that never ends. Mara touched the frame as if dusting it. Her fingers found the coin. She slipped it into her pocket like a talisman, not a call for rescue. Not yet, just a reminder of who she was when nights got narrow. She looked around the room at the people in her care, Jonah with his jaw set, Gus with his hand on the counter, Ruthie softly humming the tune she hums when a child is afraid. The men stood in a sloppy triangle that blocked the door and the path to the kitchen where the phone hung, and the drizzle turned to proper rain that washed the street clean in sheets. She spoke again, voice lower, steady as heartbeat. "Gentlemen, we are closing. I will box your pie and pour you coffee for the road. No charge. Then we are locking up. We want you safe from the rain. We want the room to sleep. Help me end the night on a good note." The offer hung like a bridge in fog. Travis smiled without kindness, said the night would end how they decided. Red tilted the lollipop stick like a toothpick. Wally stepped closer than decency allows, and the radio picked up a little static, like the air itself bracing. Mara slid her weight to the balls of her feet. She moved one glass out of reach. She placed a hand on the back of a chair so it would not tip. She made herself tall, not loud, her breath even, her eyes clear. That was when the bell above the door chimed again, soft as a chisel tap, quick as a heartbeat at the edge of trouble, the kind of sound that changes the math of a room without raising a voice. Mara did not turn yet. She kept her gaze on Travis, but her shoulders loosened a fraction. Because sometimes home walks in when You have done everything you can, and you are one breath from the brink. The bell finished its small chime, and four shapes took the doorway like a vow. Rain slid from their jackets and pooled by their boots. The diner light caught on faces Mara knew the way you know, the sound of your own name. Hartley first, taller than most doorways and gentle in the shoulders. Boozer a step behind with that sideways grin that could pry a room open. Lena with her steady eyes and the kind of stillness that tells truth. Miles last, quiet as a library and sharper than glass. They scanned without staring, counted exits without counting. They smelled the trouble and the coffee and the rain, and then Boozer said the only word that mattered, "Doc." The room tilted toward the word. Ruthie set down her teacup and breathed like a hymn had started. Jonah stood straighter with a hope he tried to hide. Gus said, "Well, I will be," and put down the glass he had been wiping into transparency. Travis did not move from the aisle. Red made a bigger show of leaning back. Wally blinked at the lights like they were suddenly too bright. Mara let the breath she had been holding settle into her belly. She did not rush the reunion. She nodded, once the coin in her apron pocket warm as a heartbeat. "Welcome home," she said, late for pie but right on time. They took seats without asking where to sit. They took the seats that opened the room. Hartley slid into the booth that blocked Travis from the counter. Boozer perched on the stool that put his back to the wall and his smile toward the door. Lena knelt briefly to pick up the coaster Wally had slapped and set it back on the table like dignity was a small thing worth doing. Miles stepped between Red and the lollipop jar and placed a napkin there as if saving a place for a better choice. None of it loud, all of it deliberate. It looked like manners. It felt like a net. Mara poured coffee like sacrament. One for Hartley, who always took 2 sugars and never complained about a burnt pot. One for Miles, black as midnight with a side of water. One for Lena, who always liked her cup warmed first. One for Boozer, who would drink anything if it meant he was nearby. When someone needed a laugh, Gus slid plates from the warmer like a stagehand who knows the scene change by heart. Peach pie with the crust that shatters like a promise kept, steam rising. A smell that reminds even grown men of kitchens, where love wore aprons and everything could still be fixed. Travis tried a smile that showed teeth without warmth. "Nice reunion," he said. "We were here first." Boozer nodded like he agreed. "You were," he said, "and we are here now, and Doc has more pie than sense and a closing time she keeps like scripture." Hartley looked at Jonah, not at Travis, and asked how school was going, called him by name, asked about the welding class and the old Chevy. He was patching, Jonah flushed, words tripping over gratitude. Red did not like being looked through. He flicked the lollipop stick again, and it hit Hartley's forearm. A small sound, like a twig in a campfire. Miles leaned to Wally, lowered his voice into a space where shame does not grow. "The hands shake a bit more when you skip dinner and chase." "It with beer," he said. "Pie and milk will steady you. I will cover it." Wally stared at his own fingers like they belonged to a stranger, said he had not eaten since noon. Lena mirrored Mara's posture without making a show of it, palms open, chin level. She asked Red where he worked, because his boots looked like he knew concrete and early mornings, a question like a window with a view back to dignity. Red tried to rise into the window, and then remembered he had decided to be difficult. They did. Not talk about service, not at first. They talked about Riverbend, about the softball team that finally beat the county champs, about the flood map changing and whose insurance went up, about the new mural at the library that made people cry without knowing why. Ruthie drifted closer with the teapot and asked if anyone wanted a top-off. It was a silly question, a soft way to stand near the storm. Mara kept her tone calm and her eyes clear. She called Travis by his name again, asked him if coffee would help with the drive, asked him if he had someone waiting who would be grateful to see him safe. It was a path back to the better version of himself. He kicked dust over it with a smirk. Boozer tapped the challenge coin on the counter, not flashy, just enough for the metal to kiss wood. The sound traveled like a ripple. He set it upright on its edge and spun it. The emblem caught. the neon and turned it into something clean. He said, you know the tradition. If you see the coin and you are family, you buy the first round. If you are not family, you get to decide what kind of man you are before the coin falls. He said it like a joke and like a binding oath. The coin hummed round and round. Travis's eyes followed the spin, because it is hard not to. He reached as if to stop it. Miles reached faster, not to take it for himself, but to place his water glass where it would guide the coin back to a gentle stop. He said, careful. It is easy to knock something over you did not mean to, and the line lived in two worlds at once. Red shifted his weight. The stool squeaked. Wally's fork clinked the plate, and his mouth surprised him by saying thank you to Miles before his pride could get in the way. Hartley laughed softly, and it sounded like a room settling on its foundation. Inside Hartley's laugh were years, a sawmill that he ran with his brother now, a back that hurt when the rain stayed 3 days, a phone number he answered at 2 a.m. When someone needed a truck and no questions, Boozer drove a school bus mornings and told corny jokes until the shy kids rolled their eyes and smiled anyway. Lena taught breathing to veterans who forgot how to breathe when the door slammed. Miles worked nights at the clinic where people without papers came when they were too tired to be brave. They were not heroes in a magazine. They were the kind of people who stay when they could leave and stitch a town back together while pretending it was nothing. Travis could feel something slipping, and he did not have the words for it. Power is a cheap high when it rests on the fear of others. It fades fast when there is a different kind of gravity in the room. He squared his shoulders and stepped closer to Mara than decency allows. His finger lifted toward her bracelet as if testing the last boundary he could see. Jonah took one step, leonine and young and full of thunder. Hartley moved like a barn door swinging shut in a storm. Not fast, just inevitable. He did not touch. Travis, he placed his palm on the back of the chair between them and said in a voice that had flown across deserts, "Brother, we leave the people who take care of us better than we found them." Red started to laugh again, a meaner sound now that a cornered feeling had found him, he said, or what? And he wanted someone to give him a reason to turn this into a story where he was the victim later. Lena met his eyes and did not blink. "Or you carry this night like a stone in your pocket for the next 10 years, she said. She told him how that works. Every time you reach for change, you feel it. Every time you tell yourself you are a good man, your fingers say, "Are you sure?" She did not say it to shame him. She said it to give him a way to set the stone down. Gus set a paper bag on the counter that had weight and mercy, coffee with lids, pie-boxed, napkins folded into little triangles. He said, "The road is slick. The bridge by Miller Creek is flooding. On the east side, take the north turn." He spoke like a father drives a nail. True and useful, Ruthie slid 2 quarters across the counter and said for the jukebox next time when you are ready to buy a gentle song. Wally looked at the pie he had not earned, and then at his own reflection in the window that rain had turned into a watercolor. He said his hands were steadier. Mara placed her coin next to Boozer's coin, 2 circles of metal like moons in phase. She told Travis about the man whose name was on her bracelet. How he taught her that strength was not the voice that fills the room, but the one that holds steady when it is time to build a bridge. She said the night could still end with grace. She said she would remember him for the good if he chose it now. You could feel the floorboards listening, the neon listening even, the rain leaning against the glass to hear what a man would do when given back his choices. The choice hung, delicate as a spider line, strong as cable, a breath, another. The room did not flinch, and because nobody rushed him, because nobody called him names or made him small, Travis had to meet himself. He had to decide whether the story of his life would be that he only felt big when others felt small. His hand dropped from the edge of Mara's bracelet. His jaw worked. Red made a noise like a fuse sputtering. Wally shifted his feet toward the door in a way that suggested the hint of leaving did not feel like losing. The coin on the counter reflected 3 faces, one of them his, all of them waiting. The choice stretched like a wire in fog. Travis stared at his own reflection in the coin and saw a man he did not fully recognize. His fingers loosened, then the world flickered. The neon outside coughed itself dark, the radio thinned to a whisper, and fell silent. The overhead bulbs blinked twice like tired eyes and went black. Rain pressed its palms against the glass. The diner became a pool of shadow and breath. Jonah gasped. Ruthie set her hand over her heart. Gus said, "There goes the..." Transformer by the mill, Mara did not raise her voice. She let it find its old cadence, calm and clear, flashlights under the counter, Jonah with me, Gus to the breaker, Hartley take the aisle, Boozer keep folks steady, Lena and Miles eyes on our guests. They moved like a drill they had promised never to need again. Jonah produced 2 small flashlights from the coffee filters bin, a silly hiding place that turned useful. Beams of clean light cut gentle paths across tabletops and pie crusts. Hartley shifted a table 2 inches to open a lane to the kitchen. Boozer said, "Well now, if the evening wanted mood lighting, it could have asked nicely." A laugh flickered and caught like kindling. Lena folded napkins into narrow strips and placed them along the floor to mark the safest route. Miles knelt by the lollipop jar and checked that glass was away from edges. Wally breathed shallow and fast and did not know he was doing it. Red whispered a curse that sounded less sure than before. Travis held still in the dark, like a man afraid to move too quickly inside a dream. The rain deepened into a hard silver sheet. A pair of headlights smeared across the windows. Brakes hissed, a car door slammed. The bell chimed again, and the door shoved open on a gust that smelled like wet earth and cold metal. A young mother stumbled in with a little boy wrapped in a striped hoodie, both soaked to the scalp, eyes wide with that vacant focus people get when they have driven through something they will not fully remember. "The bridge by Miller Creek was covered in water," she said, voice shaking, trucks turning around. "My phone is dead." The boy coughed and then hid his face against her shoulder like a small bird under a wing. Mara was already moving. Towel from the warmer, chair by the heater even though the heater was silent. A blanket from the staff cubby where Gus kept extras because Riverbend had winters and long stories. Miles saw Wally sway, saw the prickled sweat on the man's temples, saw hands that were not just shaking from drink, but from a body running out of fuel. He slid a saucer with 2 sugar packets and a glass of milk toward him, voice soft as the inside of a chapel. "Put this in you, slow and steady. No shame here. The nervous system is a stubborn friend. It needs kindness the way old engines need." "Warm oil?" Wally blinked at him. Tears he did not know he carried rimmed his eyes. He lifted the milk and drank like a man in a desert. His shoulders eased, his breath lengthened. He whispered that his mother used to tell him the same thing when he came home from double shifts at the plant. Miles smiled without moving his mouth. "Much said you learned from a good teacher, keep going." Red watched that small act, and it scrambled something in him. "Kindness is a mirror some men avoid for years." He pushed his stool back, and the door banged again. Another shape in the rain. Buck Ames from the lot behind the mill. A man with a jaw that liked to fight before his brain arrived. He shoved the Dr. Wider and yelled Travis like it was a challenge and a lifeline. Saw only shadows and thought it was his stage. He did not see the careful geometry of the room, the lanes Hartley had made, the markers Lena had placed, the small boy in the blanket. He saw only the chance to prove a story he had been telling himself since 10th grade. Under the bleachers, Boozer stepped between Buck and the center of the room with a motion you almost missed. Palms down, that easy grin that disarms without taking. "Away, dignity, evening, Buck," he said, though he did not use the word evening or any fancy greeting. He used Buck's name like a bridge plank. "We are helping a child catch his breath and figuring out the lights. Step in slow and close the door behind you. Keep the rain on the right side of the threshold." Buck hesitated. Habit wanted spectacle. The room offered him plain purpose instead. Hartley reached past him and pulled the door gentle. The latch clicked, and the outside storm became a lower roar. Gus at the breaker shook his head. "Nothing to reset here. Line is gone till the crew makes." "Rounds?" Lena guided the young mother to a chair and taught her a breathing rhythm. In through the nose for a slow count, while you imagine a light rising behind your ribs, out through the mouth like you are cooling soup for a child. The boy matched her count without knowing why, and colour crept back into his cheeks. Ruthie produced a thermos she carried for long rehearsals and poured cocoa into a paper cup. The first sip made the boy's shoulders drop. The mother cried without sound and wiped her face with the towel, like she was ashamed of water on a night already. So wet, Mara met Travis's eyes across the dim room. The flashlight beam caught the coin and threw a small circle of brightness between them, she told him. There were sandbags by the back door from the spring flood. The alley was collecting water. If the drain clogged, they would lose the kitchen. She said she could use a steady back to haul 2 bags to the threshold and another to the back of the pantry door, where water liked to sneak under. She spoke like a teammate, like she expected yes, not like a command. Travis lifted his chin. The shiver of choice ran through him again. He nodded, not big, not performative, just a nod. He stepped where Hartley's hand indicated. He moved in the lane. He carried weight like a man trying on the memory of being useful and finding that it fit. Red drifted toward the window. Buck hovered near the door, still breathing like a bull. At a gate, Wally ate pie and held milk and looked like a man who remembered his first fishing trip with his father at dawn. Jonah took the hose from the mop sink and ran it just enough to fill a stack of pitchers. Miles checked the extension cords to make sure no water could find them. If the floor got slick, Lena asked Ruthie to hum something slow. Ruthie picked a tune older than any of them, a melody that knows the shape of grief and the patience of hope. The room breathed with it. Even the rain softened a fraction in the ears of those who listened. From the alley came a sputter and a snap. A smell like hot dust and old wires. The neon transformer outside had taken on more water than it could bear. A blue lick of flame kissed the base where the sign met the wall. Smoke thinned under the door like a grey ribbon. Gus cursed under his breath in a language that carried 3 continents. And love. Mara assessed in a glance. Not panic calculation, she spoke it plain. We have a small fire at the sign base. We keep it small. We do not open this door wide or feed it oxygen. Jonah water in the pitchers toward me, hand to hand. Hartley to my left as a brace in case the door needs controlling. Boozer anchor the far end. Lena and Miles keep folks back from drafts. Gus salt from the prep shelf to throw at base if the grease near the hinge goes. Travis was already at the back with a sandbag on his shoulder. He paused and then came forward, set the bag down like a block near the threshold to limit airflow at the floor. It was clumsy and brilliant, a small hack learned from Barnes and winter drafts. Red looked at him like he had never seen him before. Buck grunted as if his role had been taken, then looked out the window and saw the blue flame lick again, and an old memory of his grandfather's shed flickered through him. How they saved it with a sheet of metal and steady hands. He reached for the baking tray by the pie case without thinking, held it up like a shield, said this could smother if we need it. His voice did not swagger, it offered. Mara nodded, took the pitchers one by one, cracked the door 2 inches. Steam rose like a ghost as water kissed heat. She did not flood it. She damped the wood around the base. She watched the flame's breath. She closed. She waited. She opened, like working a stubborn knot that tightens if you yank. Hartley braced the door with an arm that could hold a tree. In a windstorm, Boozer fed the chain of pitchers with a rhythm that made the work feel like a song. Gus arrived with a bucket of salt from the pretzel recipe he never admitted he loved. Miles kept eyes on the ceiling for smoke that would tell a different story. Lena had the mother and the boy turned away so the sight would not brand their dreams. For a long minute time became the sound of rain and breath and small instructions. The flame tried to take a deep breath, and the sandbag at the bottom stole the air from its mouth. The damp wood on either side cooled its arrogance. The salt bit down on a little flare that had ideas. The blue went to orange for a last defiant second, and then to a sullen black line that smoked and whimpered itself out. Mara closed the door gentle and set her palm against it like she was blessing a child. The room held very still. Then Ruthie's hum found the end of a phrase and started another, lighter. The boy sucked cocoa from the edge of his cup. Wally exhaled a long, stored breath and leaned back like he had been holding up a wall for years. Red looked at Buck as if a mirror had been moved under his chin. He said, "You ever notice how doing something with your hands quiets the noise in your head?" Buck snorted, and then half smiled, said his grandfather could have told him that for free. If he had ever stopped long enough to listen, Travis rubbed his palms down his jeans, looked at the sandbag and the door and the smudged window and the little boy. He cleared his throat and said, "What next?" And he said it to Mara like a man who has accepted a chain of command that is built on care, not fear. Mara turned toward the back, where water pooled in a sneaky stripe under the pantry door. "There is a drain that clogs with maple leaves every storm," she said. "We open the grate and clean it, or we mop this floor till dawn. I need a light and a steady hand." Jonah raised his flashlight, and a grin he could not contain. Travis followed without being told. Buck went with Red, not to protect him, but to be next to him. In this new way of being, Wally asked if he could sweep because his hands were good. At rhythm again, Gus told him where to find the wide push broom. Ruthie took the mother to the staff bathroom to dry clothes on the radiator. Lena checked the boy's breathing and touched his forehead like a sister. From far away, a siren sounded. Not urgent, steady. The volunteer crew making rounds through flooded streets. The storm had turned the town tender. People are different in rain and candlelight. We see each other's outlines more plainly. Boozer tapped the coin again, not to boast, to anchor. He looked at Mara, and she looked back, and in the exchange you could read a chapter. None of them had planned a reunion here. None of them had wanted trouble. All of them had trained for nights exactly like this, nights where the world tries to tip and you put your shoulder against the table and say, "Not tonight." Not in this room, them. Ali Drain fought like a stubborn animal. Jonah knelt in the rain, with his hoodie clinging to his back, the flashlight wedged between his teeth. Travis crouched beside him with fingers deep in cold leaves and bottle caps and twigs. Together they scooped and cleared, water tugging at their wrists. The moment the grate gulped and swirled, they whooped without shame. The alley dropped an inch, the current softened. And for a heartbeat they were two boys, finding a lost marble in a muddy yard, a small win that felt like a flag on a hard hill. Inside, Red and Buck pushed water with the wide broom in slow arcs, the floor turning from river to shallow mirror. Wally kept time like a drummer. Steady strokes, no rush. The young mother sat near the heater with the blanket tucked to the boy's chin. Lena watched the rise and fall of his breath and matched her own to make a quiet metronome he could follow. Ruthie built a lantern from a jelly jar and a phone light. The glow sat on the counter like a tame star. Boozer counted the picture chain when they moved them earlier, and now he counted the broom sweeps. Not bossing, just making rhythm. We breathe on 2, we lift on 3. We rest when the song says, "Rest." A heavy thud rolled from the pantry. The cheap metal shelf had swelled against damp wood. One leg wobbled, and a stack of plates began to shiver into a slide. Hartley moved first, wide palm under the shelf lip. Shoulder taking weight, Miles eased the top tray down with a 2-finger grip. Gus slipped a folded menu under the short leg, like a carpenter making do. The wobble became a purr. The plates settled with a grateful sigh. The room exhaled. The boy under the blanket smiled for the first time. A shape like a helicopter reflected in his cocoa, and only he seemed to notice. A toy memory or a ceiling pattern. Either way, it felt like someone watching over the night. A quick rap hit the window. 3 knuckles and a pause. Then 2. Evie Tran. From the volunteer crew stood outside in a reflective jacket beading rain. Her headlamp haloed her like a lighthouse. Mara cracked the door enough for news. Evie said the bridge is closed. The substation blew a relay. Crews are spread thin. Shelter. In place if you have heat, keep it low. If you do not have heat, keep people layered and dry. She handed in a roll of bright tape and 2 foil blankets. Saw Mara and the old unit in a glance, and the way trouble had been tuned down 1 notch, she nodded a blessing that needed no words, pulled the door tight, and moved on to the next storefront. The neon outside still smouldered wet and dark, the sign. A quiet rectangle against the rain. Wally sniffed and said he used to ride a bucket truck before the plant. Lineman for 6 winters, learned to hate wind and love good boots. He pointed at the cord to the sign and said, "If we loop that lid high and dry, it will not wick water back to the base and spark again." Miles fetched a rubber mat, and Ruthie found duct tape in a drawer where lost things go. Red held the ladder. With both hands, Buck braced his back. Wally climbed slow, hooked the lead to a dry beam with a loop that would make any foreman proud. When his feet hit the floor, the room clapped without making noise, a quiet thunder of palms against palms. Wally ducked his head like a man not used to applause. Travis stepped in from the alley, soaked and grinning, hair plastered to his brow. He looked at Mara not with defiance, but with a kind of hopeful uncertainty. He said, "Drain is clear, the alley is breathing again. What else? Give me something with weight," words that would have sounded like challenge. An hour ago held humility now. Mara handed him a stack of flour sacks, told him to slide them in plastic and lay them like a little levee along the back door. She said the trick is overlap and patience. He nodded and got to work. Red watched him, and something in Red's jaw loosened. Maybe a story he had told himself about what kind of men they were began to feel. Too small, Boozer found the jukebox quarter Ruthie had left and palmed it like a secret. He could not power music, but he could power memory. He told a silly story of a convoy breakdown in dust and how Doc had turned a ration tin into a drum to keep exhausted hands moving. Ruthie picked up the beat on the counter with a spoon. Jonah tapped the drain grate with a worn fork. The sound was nothing, and it was everything, a pulse that said, "We are together." The young mother laughed through tears and covered her mouth like she had stolen a treasure. The boy peeked out from the blanket and tapped his cup in time. Another twist of the night slithered in. A faint smell near the back stove. Not gas, old oil waking. Gus checked knobs by touch. Main valves closed. Pilots dead. Safe for now. But the air near the range held yesterday's fry and today's ash. Mara spread damp towels along the floor near the ovens to catch any stray seep. Miles cracked the rear window 2 inches to pull a lazy draft, and Lena hung another towel there to filter the air. Small measures, thoughtful and precise, safety made from ordinary things handled with care. Mara's bracelet caught a flash of the lantern jar. Her fingers turned the names on the silver into a roll call. She remembered a night in a tent when wind bullied the canvas, and she had learned that courage sometimes sounds like someone counting in a gentle voice. She felt the same thing moving here. Not bravado, fellowship. The room had shape-shifted from a place of service to a place of shelter, and the men who entered on a gust of swagger now stood like pillars in the frame. Surprised to find they liked the way that felt. Travis cleared his throat and tried to offer words that did not come easy. He looked at Jonah and said, "Sorry for earlier. I was loud and wrong." Looked at Gus and said, "Your place is decent and I treated it like it was less." Then he turned toward Mara, eyes not quite steady. He said, "I talked to you like trouble when you were steady as a lighthouse." The apology was not pretty, it was real. It moved through the room like warm air through cold lungs. Red tried on a grin that was not mean for the first time tonight. It fit a little awkward. Buck stood with his hands at his sides like a worker waiting for the next task. Wally looked at his boots and then squared them at shoulder width like a man bracing to receive grace. The boy coughed, a soft bark at first and then a tight rasp. Miles was there with a paper cup held like a chalice. Asked the mother about history of wheeze. She nodded, said a few winter nights with tight chests, no inhaler in the car. Miles improvised a spacer from a water bottle with the bottom snipped and a damp towel, a trick from clinics where money is always late. He used a sample rescue canister he carried for nights like this, 2 measured mists into the bottle. Gentle breaths counted with Lena's hand on the boy's back. The cough eased like a knot untangling. The mother sagged into Ruthie's shoulder and said blessings in a string of words from her childhood that no one translated and no one needed to. Evie returned with a flash of headlamp. Set a small battery lantern on the counter and 3 protein bars for anyone shaking. Said the far corner of town was taking water. The church was opening its basement. When the lights come back was a question for morning. She looked at Red and Buck and Travis and Wally and saw what had changed. Her mouth tugged at one corner. She pulled a marker from her pocket and drew a quick arrow on the glass door. "Shelter open here till dawn," she said. "If people knock, let them in if you can keep them dry." Then she was gone again into the rain, a bright fish in a dark river. The diner transformed from a business into a bridge. Chairs unstacked and circled, towels set out like offerings. The pie tin became a tray of sliced apples from Gus's personal bag. Ruthie's tea became a little ceremony that warmed hands and quieted nerves. Boozer showed Jonah how to rig the foil blankets as reflectors to bounce the lantern light. Hartley propped the back door at a hand width to keep the draft gentle without inviting flood. Lena wrote good words on napkins for people to carry in their pocket. "Breathe, steady, you are safe here, nothing fancy." Medicine wrapped in ink. Mara moved among them with the same sure gait she used long ago, not the boss, the center of gravity. Each time she passed the photo by the register, the coin glinted like a star, seen between clouds. The names on her bracelet felt lighter, not because grief had left. Grief never leaves, because the love that carried those names had found another. Night to work? She glanced toward the window where rain began to ease, the drops fatter, slower, the kind of rain that means an ending is on its way. Not yet. Soon. She set her palm on the counter, looked at the men who had arrived wrong and were learning how to stand right, and she said softly, "We are going to be okay. Keep your hands moving. Keep your hearts open. Help is a verb tonight." Midnight leaned against the windows like a tired friend. The rain softened, but the wind found new tricks around the corners. The diner breathed like a camp after a long march. A knock rose from the door, not a fist, a wobble. Mara opened a hand width. An older man stood there, soaked to the brim of his cap, lips dusky, one hand at his chest. "I did not want to make a fuss," he said. Then his knees sagged like wet cardboard. Hartley caught him under the arms before the floor could. Miles slid a chair into place. Mara's voice found that clean channel she carried from deserts and night flights. Jonah first aid kit, Ruthie warm towel, Gus lights closer, Lena count with me on his breath, slow and even. "We have you, sir. Stay with us." The man's name tag from a hardware store dangled. Percy Lyle, 60 and a little, widower since last winter. Known for helping fix porches on Sundays, his pulse thudded under Mara's fingers, not wild, just tired and stubborn. "Any aspirin in the room?" Mara asked. Wally reached to his shirt pocket and pulled a tiny travel tube like a magician with a soft heart. "Kept for headaches that had other causes," he said. Mara nodded gratitude that landed like a blessing. She had him chew one, small sips of water between counts. Lena kept air moving with the cracked window and towel. Miles watched the man's face and the way his chest rose like a hesitant tide. Evie's headlamp flashed by and then peered in. Her radio crackled that the closest rig was tied at a creek reroute. 15 minutes if the river behaved. The diner became a small clinic without changing clothes. Buck pulled 2 broom handles from the back and Boozer threaded an apron between them like a sling. Hartley tested the flex with a hand that knew the weight of men. Red lifted the lantern high. Travis kept the path clear. Jonah cut strips of linen from a clean dish towel and tied them into loops. Mara spoke to Percy the whole time, telling Him about the chair he was sitting in, about the pie he would owe them if he tried to check out early, about the way hearts can be convinced by kindness to keep going. Percy whispered that he missed his wife when the house creaked at night. Ruthie answered that the house creaked because it remembered her, and maybe tonight the creaks were her blowing on the coals of his stubborn heart. Percy chuckled into a cough and then breathed deeper. Red stood over the scene like a man seeing a new map. His hands wanted something to do that was not mean. He said his brother Danny had died at a gas station once because nobody knew what to do, and he had stood there and yelled at the wrong people. His voice shook, and he hated it, and he let it happen anyway. Miles met his eyes and said, "Then tonight you stand and count with me. 4 in and 6 out. A tide that tells the heart that dawn is not far." A sound rose from the back door like someone scraping a chair over tile. The water had crept again, just a sheen. Travis moved on instinct, slid fresh plastic under the flour sacks, overlapped the edges like shingles on a roof. He pressed the seams with the heel of his hand until they held. The alley sighed and stayed. In its lane, Buck took the baking tray from earlier and set it under the drip by the window with a folded towel to hush the plink. Small details made the room gentle again. The boy under the foil blanket watched with solemn eyes and then gave Travis a thumbs up that hit him harder than any scolding ever had. Gus brewed emergency coffee by pouring near boiling water from a kettle onto grounds in a sock he swore was clean. Boozer twirled the sock like a carnival trick and caught it in a pot to laughter that did not break the careful mood. Ruthie poured the 2 best cups for Percy's son and daughter-in-law, who had arrived breathless from 3 blocks away. They called by a neighbor with a battery phone. The daughter-in-law held Percy's hand and said, "How could all this be happening in a diner?" And Mara said softly that most of the world gets saved in places that smell like coffee and rain, not in theaters. With spotlights, the radio whispered that a rig was near. Evie cracked the door. The wind shoved like a kid trying to wrestle his way in. 2 EMTs hustled through with a soft gurney and practiced hands. They recognized Mara with a half smile and the quick respect medics carry for those who know. She gave a tight report. Pulse, aspirin, color improving, breaths counted and calm. One EMT called her Doc like Boozer had, not as a title but as a nickname made of knights and witness. They transferred Percy with a blanket tuck that felt like tucking a child. Red kept counting in a whisper until the EMT said he could stop because the monitor would count now. Red kept counting anyway, and then laughed at himself. The laugh was not cruel this time. It was the sound of a man surprised by his own tenderness. As the gurney rolled, the young mother stood and touched Percy's sleeve, told him she would pray in the words she knew and the words she did not. Percy nodded and gripped her fingers with a force that said he believed her more than he believed machines. The door opened. The rain had gentled to a fine lace. The rig's lights turned the street into a red-blue painting. A neighbor across the way clapped once, not at the spectacle. At the relief, the door closed. The room held still like a choir, waiting for the next verse. Silence has flavors. This one tasted like cinnamon and metal and newness. Buck scratched the back of his head and said he had not held a door for anyone in years, and that he liked the way his shoulders felt after. Wally said his hands were steady enough now to cut fruit without chasing it around the plate. Gus handed him a knife and a cutting board and said, "Let us see." Jonah leaned into Boozer and asked what the coin meant when nobody was in uniform. Boozer said it meant you show up and carry weight and make a circle where nobody falls through. He spun the coin again and it hummed a friendly note. Mara turned to Travis and Red. She did not give them a speech. She gave them a job. The lot behind the diner flooded where the ground dipped. If a car parked there tried to leave, it would get stuck. She needed 2 sawhorses from the shed and a rope line strung across with rags tied every 10 feet so it would be seen. Travis nodded like he had been waiting for an assignment that lived outside his own head. Red said he would knot the rags because his uncle taught him a trucker hitch that would not slip. Buck chimed in that he knew where the shed key hung and that he would not pocket it like he might have 2 hours ago. He smiled when he said it and did not flinch at his own honesty. They stepped into the lot under a break in the clouds that showed 3 stubborn stars. They worked in quiet that sounded like respect. The rope line went up, the rags wagged in the wind like a procession of small flags. Someone in an upstairs window flicked their light twice in thanks. They flicked it back twice with their headlamps, and felt like kids trading signals across a back fence. When they came in again, the diner had taken on a new smell. Not just coffee and rain, something like cedar and old hymnals. Ruthie said it was the smell of people choosing to be good at. The same time, nobody argued. Lena wrote one more napkin note and handed it to the young mother. It said, "Sleep will come back. Keep this in your pocket and touch it when doubt sings too loud." The mother tucked it near her heart. The boy snored faintly, his breath a small engine that promised to carry him all the way to morning. Miles checked Wally's cheeks and nodded like a doctor who sees the numbers he likes. Hartley stretched his back and the bones popped like popcorn. Boozer asked for applause for the drain crew and for the levee crew and for the broom orchestra, and the room obliged with palms that knew how to be soft. Gus found a stack of old church bulletins in a drawer and passed them as placemats to anyone. Still damp, he told a joke about the time a wedding party got snowed in and they served pancakes under the archway. Mara rubbed her bracelet with her thumb and thought of the missing name and did not feel heavy. She felt guided. She looked at Travis and Red and Wally and Buck and saw men who had walked into a room to take something and had found something else. Responsibility, a weight that makes you taller. She lifted her chin, and they lifted theirs back. A silent nod of rank shared and not imposed. Evie returned a final time to say the substation had a temporary fix. A rolling light would come street by street before dawn. The church had 20 cots, but the diner had the heartbeat tonight. If people knocked, they would send them here. Mara said, "Send who needs the light and the warmth. We have both." She looked at the picture by the register and the coin and the jar lantern and the foil blanket turned reflector and the rope line drying in people's hands. She saw a town rehearsing a better version of itself inside a storm dawn, arrived shyly, a grey ribbon slipping between raindrops and window glass. The street sighed like a body letting go. The wind lost its sharp teeth and turned to a tired whisper. In the diner, the lantern glow softened. Faces took on the shape of morning. The young mother dozed with her boy's breath like a tiny engine against her shoulder. Ruthie wrapped her cardigan over them both. Gus leaned on the counter with the easy slouch of a man who has earned his fatigue. Boozer stacked cups in slow. "And towers." Hartley rolled his shoulders until the night cracked and fell away. A soft knock came, and the door opened to Mr. Alvarez from the bakery. Flour on his sleeves even in a storm. He carried a crate of rolls warm as pockets. Said the ovens never sleep. Said he followed the rope line through the lot like it was a ribbon to a party. Behind him came Dee and Carla from the church basement with a thermos the size of hope. Evie returned with a nod that said the grid would hum by sunrise. A few more knocks, and in came 2 teens with a wet dog wrapped in a quilt, a delivery driver whose route had turned into a lake, 3 neighbors who had not wanted to be alone with the noises of old houses. The diner grew by inches, not louder, fuller. Miles checked Percy's family text on Evie's radio, stable and grumpy, which in Riverbend meant blessed. The news ran. Around the counter like a small bird, the room breathed deeper. Wally sharpened the knife on a steel and sliced apples into moons. Red took a rag and polished the lollipop jar until it gleamed. Then he reached into his pocket and set down the candy he had taken one by one. His hand shook, but he did not hide it. Jonah met his eyes and said, "Thank you," like it was forgiveness and not inventory. Red swallowed and nodded like a man learning. A new alphabet. Travis tied the last knot in the rope line sign outside and came in with quiet eyes. He asked if the boy liked magic, then made a coin vanish and returned behind a small ear. The boy laughed a laugh that wiped away an hour of fear. Buck stood near the window and saw a car try to nose from the flooded lot. He stepped out, waved easy, guided the driver to a higher patch, shoulders wide, voice calm. When he came back in, he rubbed the fog from the glass with his sleeve and said it felt good to be useful without shouting. Lena handed him a napkin with a word on it. Steady, he tucked it into his shirt pocket like a medal he chose for himself. Evie looked at the baking tray by the door and the sandbag seam and said whoever laid that little levee ought to come show the firehouse kids how to think like water. Travis, colored like a kid caught doing right, said he would bring donuts if someone else brought the lesson plan. Boozer said he would bring the jokes and the first aid kit and a whistle if whistling would not scare the kids. Ruthie set the jelly jar lantern on the photo shelf near the framed tarmac picture. The coin glinted beside it. Mara lifted the coin and felt its weight. She looked at her old unit, Hartley with his tree-trunk arms, Boozer with his sideways grin, Lena with her quiet spine, Miles with his night clinic hands. She whispered names. From the bracelet in a roll call that rose like steam, then she set the coin flat and pressed it into a dab of wax. Ruthie had melted. A small seal. Not to keep people out, to invite them in. She said from now on, anyone who touches this coin has to choose their next act with care, make the room safer, lighter, kinder, or step away and breathe until you can. Gus brought out an old chalkboard from the storage room. Cracked and perfect, he wrote. Tonight we carried this together. He handed the chalk to the room and stepped back. The board filled the way a riverbed. Fills after a drought, Travis wrote drain team with a crooked grin. Red drew a rope with little flags and wrote slow is smooth. Buck scrawled hold the door and underlined it like a promise. Wally wrote hands steady now and stared at the words like he had just met part of himself. The young mother wrote thank you in 3 languages and then drew a small heart. The boy colored. Evie signed with the volunteer crew call sign and a tiny lightning bolt. Jonah wrote I can do hard things. Ruthie added sing when scared. Hartley wrote lift together. Lena wrote breathe together. Miles wrote rest when you can. Doc will still be here. A low hum rolled through the street like a bass note from a church. Organ. Lights blinked twice. The neon sign outside tried a shy glow and then held, not screaming yellow, a clean blue-white like frost under sunlight. The jars and plates took on their morning faces. The room did not cheer loud. It sighed grateful and smiled. Gus clicked off the lanterns one by one, like kissing children goodnight in reverse. The radio tuned back to life with a soft static and then a fiddle. Someone at the church basement must have found the right station and the right song. Mara looked at Travis and Red and Wally and Buck and saw men who would not be the same in the next bar or the next storm. She did not offer a lecture. She offered a shift schedule. She said the diner would host a Sunday night squad for anyone who wanted to learn the quiet hero things. Door bracing and drain clearing and spacer making and how to speak to a frightened heart. She said the pay was pie and coffee and the knowledge that your hands know what to do. Travis said he would come. Red said he would bring his brothers. Kids. Buck said he would bring the baking tray and the patience he was practicing. Wally said he would bring his old lineman gloves and a story about wind that listens when you speak kindly. The teens with the wet dog asked if they could help put chairs back. Hartley showed them how to lift with a straight back. Boozer made a game of it. Every chair returned earned a terrible joke. The teens groaned and kept working. The delivery driver called his dispatcher and said he would be late and happy about it. The young mother wrote her number on a napkin, in case the boy ever wanted to thank a room. Jonah taped the napkin next to the chalkboard like a pendant at a shrine. Ruthie hummed a morning hymn, not churchy, porchy. Something about porches and kettles and neighbors. who remember how to knock Evie, lingered at the door and said the town council was meeting next week about flood plans. She said they could use voices that smelled like coffee instead of microphones. Gus said the diner would host if the council did not mind that the host had opinions shaped like pancakes. Laughter rose easy. Red asked Mara if he could fix the scratch he had put on the counter with the coaster. Gus slid him a little bottle of oil and a soft cloth. Red rubbed the wood with care. The mark softened. A parable in plain sight. Buck saw a nailhead proud near the baseboard and set it flush with the back of a spoon. Wally stood under the sign and promised out loud to call a licensed electrician he trusted before anyone touched a wire. He said he would pay half and work. Off the rest, sweeping if Gus would let him. Gus held out his hand and shook on it like a contract written in daylight. Miles packed his kit. Lena folded the foil blanket into a crisp square and handed it to the boy like a knighting. The boy saluted in a way children invent, serious and shining. Ruthie teased the dog with a crust end, and the dog wagged its whole body like a flag. Hartley wrote the diner's address on Buck's palm, because Buck said when he tells a new story he needs to hold the coordinates in his skin. Boozer spun the coin once more and let it wobble to a stop. The hum it sang sounded like a promise heard across a field. Mara wiped the last line of water from the back door threshold and stood still. She saw the room as it had been and as it was now. She saw the knight walk in, wearing trouble, and walk out carrying tables. She saw the old unit at her shoulders, and the new unit made of a diner and a storm and a handful of men who had a different ending inside them than the one they practiced before midnight. She touched the bracelet and whispered a thank you to the names for teaching her how to stand. When rooms lean, she turned to the chalkboard and added one more line, "We guard each other here." Then she set the chalk down, like setting down a weight she no longer needed to carry alone. The door opened for the morning like it always does, but something had shifted in the hinges. The bell chimed a small, bright chord. The first commuter stepped in, paused at the coin and the chalkboard, and the circle of chairs, and the faces that looked like they had seen a long, kind miracle. He asked if the coffee was on. Gus said it always is. Mara poured with a smile that was not tired, just full. Travis held the door for a stranger, like a man practicing a new name. Red picked up a broom, like an oath. Buck took the stool next to Jonah and asked about welding class. Wally checked the sign with a careful eye. Ruthie warmed the teapot. Boozer started a story that would end with laughter. Hartley leaned on the counter like a human oak. Lena and Miles slipped out with a wave. The town woke into itself. Outside, the clouds lifted in frayed bands, and sunlight pressed its fingers across the wet street. The reflection in the diner window showed a room that remembered how to rescue and how to forgive. The night had been a test and a teacher. The lesson stayed. Not carved in stone, written in hands in the clean seam of a sandbag line, in a jar set back on a counter, in the steady breath of a boy sleeping through a storm, in the coin warm with fresh fingerprints, in a waitress who never stopped being a medic, and in an old unit that walked in and found a larger family waiting.